have to legalize localization. And here's my proposition. We should ask the SEC for a complete waiver of all filings related to small investments in micro-business. Complete exemption. Just as an experiment. So let's take businesses, say, of under $250,000 in capitalization. Let's say that, any person could buy up to $100 of stock in that. I mean, what kind of risk are you taking? You take a bigger risk when you go to Denny's. And let's say that, it only applies to local stock. Why should the SEC care? Now, we could do some things in this state to start facilitating this, okay? We could allow, for example, cooperatives to start investing in these kinds of micro-businesses. So existing cooperatives could begin to serve as investment funds for people's pensions. We could create very simple techniques for people to issue local stock. In New Mexico, a local stock issue costs $200 in a postage stamp. Here, it's much more expensive. This is a regulatory reform that could come from this chamber. A local stock exchange. We could ask the SEC for special permission to set up a micro-business stock exchange in this state. And here's an idea about how to kick the whole thing off, which is with a modest tax credit. In the state of Maine, there's a 40% tax credit for anyone who puts money, that is any resident of Maine who puts money in a qualified Maine business. 40% tax credit. What is a qualified Maine business? Well, if you have an advanced manufacturer with a local branch factory, that qualifies. If you have a global bank with a branch in Maine, that qualifies. But if you have a genuine local business, it does not qualify. That's outrageous. But it does lead to the thought that a 20-word amendment in the state code in Maine that said, hear ye, from here on in, the only businesses we're allowing this tax credit for is locally owned business. Wow. Suddenly, every investment institution in the state would try to figure out how can we take advantage of this tax credit. And frankly, I think 40% is far too high. How about 5%? Something really nominal. A 5% tax credit for Vermont residents who put their money in genuine local business would prime the pump for all of this legal and institutional reform that could open the way, literally, of billions of dollars coming into local business in the state. And unless you start paying attention to the security side of reform, I don't see how the green revolution that everyone is talking about can possibly take place. Now, I do want to go back to this slide here about entrepreneurship, because you, like most states in the country, have incubators. Most of your incubators are focused on high-tech, nanotech, biotech, all big non-local business wannabes. And what happens is that great non-local businesses graduate from these incubators after you've invested several years' worth of money in them. And then they go public and they disappear. That is not what you should be doing. We need to create local stock issues around the businesses we are incubating. And then the incubator might keep 5 or 10% as payment and gradually sell those shares out in the state, and that becomes the finance for the incubator, thereby creating a self-financing meta-business. All right, so just a few other legislative ideas, since we're in the hollow halls of legislation here. Planning. And this is running through, again, the 6 Ps. Things that are easy to do, cheap to do, that would be home runs for local economic development. So planning. How about giving every community in this state better data so that they can calculate their own leakages and see what encouraging government to selectively procure local goods and services. And by the way, I don't favor giving local businesses an unfair advantage in public procurement. But what I do favor is that with every bid, the government should also ask what percentage of this contract will be spent in the state. And then you can calculate objectively. What is the multiplier? What is the expected tax receipts? And you adjust the price objectively. Now, the truth is that a non-local business that spent all of its money locally could do very well, so it's not discriminatory. But the reality is that the local businesses will be spending more of their money locally and will naturally get the advantage that they deserve in the procurement process. So there are ways to structure this consistent with the requirements of the World Trade Organization and other kinds of contract law. And policy making. Look, everything on this list costs a little bit of money. Costs some money to do leakage analysis, to do incubators, to set up business alliances, to do local stock markets, to set up local first programs, but none of these things frankly cost very much money. You could take the money that you are wasting on outside recruitment, put that money in these things and give money back to the Vermont taxpayer and do great from an economic development standpoint. So I believe what is next is for you folks to act. And I want to give you two quick examples, one in this country and one outside.